Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So this is part 2 of people who knew Bryan Kohberger. I found a couple other ones that I missed, so I'm going to add them in here. Okay, so here they are. So this first guy, for some reason you can't hear what the questions he's being asked. So there's like a silent part where he's like listening and waiting for the question and then he answers it, but you can't even hear the person asking him. So I think I'm going to cut out that part. So it might kind of seem odd, like he's answering questions, or where are these questions coming from? It's because there is somebody asking him questions, but it's not on the audio for some reason.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I mean, I was, just like sleeping here on the couch in my parents' house, and I woke up to all these tweets that were like, oh, they got the guy. And of course, this has been something that everyone in Pullman has been following, everyone in the whole Pullman, Moscow area. And so, I look on my phone and I see the guy's name and I see the picture and I'm thinking, that looks a lot like my TA who's also named Bryan, but that would be crazy. And so I went and I checked my email, to see the emails I'd had with him, and the name matched and everything. And yeah, it was just like totally jarring, totally shocking to realize that this person that had been, kind of grading my papers was, allegedly this like horrible murderer. Entirely. All our interactions came in the form of the class, and not even like, office hours. Like, it was all within the confines of a lecture hall. He was pretty strict as far as grading goes. When he came into class, he was very, not super mentally present. He would stand up at the front, look at the ground. He had a lot of like boilerplate responses he would give people rather than, maybe something he had thought up on the spot. It seemed like he would be, he'd come in knowing what he was going to say to like most interactions. And then when he would grade your papers, he would be grading you on what he ended up calling like a higher standard. But what it really felt like to us was he was grading us like he would have graded himself as a PhD student. And so that was just kind of like, we were all annoyed by him. And so I knew his name, I knew like, oh, TA Bryan, like he sucks at this. Like he's grading us too harshly. And that was like an annoyance, but obviously beyond that, we just thought he was a little weird and kind of, a bad grader. Yeah, he actually only left me good comments, which is just kind of silly. Like the only ones I could send in were nice ones, but for most people, he was being pretty harsh in the comments. For whatever reason, he was being pretty good to me. Yeah, actually, we had, our professor was big on the idea that like, if we're all going to be attorneys someday, then we have to know how to argue our case. And so he scheduled a day where everyone, came in ready to argue to get their grades up, and he brought in Bryan and he was like, all right, go at him. And he had Bryan stand up, and everyone was, like a few people were on his side because they wanted to keep their high grades and not like have questions be cut out or whatever. But for the most part, it was like, half of 150 person class just asking him all these real critical questions, and he would answer. And he tried pretty hard to defend himself, which was the kind of thing that our professor loved. He wanted the like courtroom environment. And so, so there was just a period of class where we were all sort of arguing about this. It wasn't like yelling or anything, but it was certainly conflict, Yeah. We just, it would have been about a month before winter break when like the murders happened. And we didn't obviously build our framework for this around that because we had no reason to connect him to that, at the time. But definitely around then, he started grading everybody just 100s, not like you pretty much, if you turned something in, you were getting high marks, and he stopped leaving notes. It was just, he seemed preoccupied is what I would have said at the time. And now obviously he seems like he was probably pretty preoccupied, but it was much easier. You turn in whatever you wanted pretty much, and he was just grading them up and sending them back. Like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. He probably, that I saw, he was always a little bit spotty on whether or not he'd come to class because he had, whatever PhD stuff over the top of it. But the couple times that he did come after or around that time period, I remember him, he had like a little bit more facial hair, just like stubble, but definitely less like well kept than he was. And he was a little quieter. He used to stand up at the start of class and like talk about some stuff sometimes. And this time he didn't really do that at all. He was definitely, I think, like the previous like mental preoccupation that we had been noticing, where it was like he didn't really want to be there. That was at like an all-time high. And he just, didn't look like he was doing great.
He was kind of awkward, but I feel like you can't just write someone off as being crazy just because they're a little awkward,
Just months after his graduation from DeSales, Kohberger moved across the country to Washington to begin his PhD studies in criminal justice at Washington State University.
It's crazy because literally days after these murders happened, he brought it up when I saw him in the hallway.
Just across the hall from Kohberger's Pullman, Washington apartment lives Christian Martinez. He says Kohberger's dad approached him early on.
His dad was wanting to introduce me to Bryan, and he said something. I don't remember the exact word he used to describe him, but it was something that was he has a hard time making friends, or he's kind of shy, or something like that.
Martinez tells us Kohberger kept up with the murders and even brought them up as a topic of conversation.
He was like, "Oh, did you hear about these murders that happened?" And it was so short after they actually happened, there was barely any news articles out. So there wasn't much that I could have read. So I was like, "Yeah, man, that's crazy. Yeah, of course I've heard about them." And he was like, "Yeah, it seems like they don't have any leads." And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, there's not much about it, there's nothing, I have no details really to say." But yeah, and then he's like, "Yeah, it seems like they think it was a crime of passion." Those were the two things he said, was that they had no leads and they think it was a crime of passion.
On top of that, Kohberger may have had a fascination with death or killing.
One thing that stuck out was it was kind of on the subject of what it would take to take someone's life. It was kind of he was trying to see my perspective on, I guess, taking someone's life.
After the pair were first introduced last summer, Martinez invited Kohberger to a pool party, and they saw each other occasionally after that. At that same party, Zach Cartwright met Kohberger for the first time.
He did seem pretty kind of just socially awkward and kind of hard to carry a conversation with, if I remember correctly. But besides that, he mainly just stood to the side and was really observant, and so much so that based on that one small interaction, he knew exactly who I was maybe a month or so later when I saw him on that hike.
When they crossed paths again, Cartwright says it was strange how quickly Kohberger recognized him.
It was really weird how he approached me and the people that I was with, because he acted kind of like we were best friends, or it was like a reunion or something, and he was really excited to see us, and I had no idea really who he was right at that second.
Those two small interactions proved important enough for Cartwright to be interviewed by the FBI after Kohberger's arrest.
I did speak to the FBI at one point. I do believe that they spoke to a lot of people that were at that party. It may be because that was one of his very first times, if not his first time in Moscow.
Martinez and his wife were also interviewed by the FBI. He tells us his wife always felt something was off with the now suspected murderer.
She didn't have a good feeling about him, because every time I would tell her I'm going to invite Bryan, because he didn't have any friends. I was trying to bring him out and maybe meet people he can, relate to. But she was always like, "No, please don't." There was just something about him that she didn't like.
In recalling their conversations after Kohberger's arrest, some key points stick out.
I guess looking back, it's kind of funny because he was talking about he was talking about genealogy, because I was talking about the 23andMe, because my sister had just did all that. And then he brought up something similar in his studies that had to do with being able to catch criminals because of their relatives' DNA, which is, I guess, how he got caught up in his mix.
The probable cause affidavit released after Kohberger's arrest revealed a knife sheath was left behind at the crime scene containing a single source of male DNA. When compared with DNA recovered from the trash at Kohberger's parents' home, it proved to be a near-perfect match. When the FBI interviewed Martinez, they asked whether he had ever seen Kohberger with a similar weapon.
They just asked about if he had a knife on him or anything like that. If I ever noticed him with a knife. I didn't. He never had anything on him like that.
When Thanksgiving approached less than 2 weeks after the murders, Moscow police announced their investigation would continue through the holiday.
I want to assure you, first off, that the loss of Xana, Kaylee, Madison, and Ethan remains the highest priority for the Moscow Police Department. We will continue putting all of our resources into investigating and solving these murders. Investigators are prepared to work through the Thanksgiving holiday to continue their efforts.
As local, state, and federal police continued on in the early stages of the investigation, Kohberger texted Martinez on Thanksgiving, reading, quote, "Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family."
It kind of made me feel bad because me and my wife were talking and like how I was like one of the people that he made friends with. And then it kind of made me feel bad, like, I don't know. What if it would have made a difference that I had been able to like meet up with him the times that I could have? Like maybe that would have changed anything if it would have, but I don't know.
According to court documents, investigators believe the murders happened just 11 days before Kohberger sent Martinez that Thanksgiving text, between 4 and 4:25 a.m. A white suspect vehicle was seen near the home at that time and multiple times after. Investigators later determined it was a 2011 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra. Weeks after the murders, Moscow police put out photos of an Elantra, saying it was a vehicle of interest. The following week, Kohberger was behind the wheel of his white Hyundai Elantra when he was pulled over by police.
So you're coming from Washington State University? Yeah. And you're going where? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Kohberger was actually stopped twice in Indiana, about 10 minutes apart, as he drove cross-country with his father from Washington to Pennsylvania for his winter break. Both times, he was stopped for following another vehicle too closely. When the Pennsylvania search warrant was executed at Kohberger's parents' home, investigators recovered multiple items from the vehicle, including hiking boots, a shovel, goggles, and a wrench. Court documents also show one of the surviving roommates saw the suspect the night of the murders, noting he was 5'10" or taller with bushy eyebrows. Martinez agrees he had a memorable look.
Like every time I would like talk to him, my wife describes it as like a death stare. And like it kind of is like you make eye contact with people, but like you're not like constantly like just staring at him. He would be like constantly like staring at me, like he's just trying to like analyze me. But that was a feeling I would get.
Dana Kennedy is a senior reporter for the New York Post, and she's live with me now. Dana, you were able to speak with the aunt of this suspect, of Bryan Christopher Kohberger, today. Welcome, and what did the aunt tell you?
I've actually spoke to two of them, and they were both married to brothers of Michael Kohberger, that's the murder suspect's father. And the one aunt that I spoke to, who a lot of them are in the Las Vegas area, and she said the last time she saw Bryan and his father Michael was about 4 years ago at a funeral out in the Nevada area. And she said that Bryan's affect in general, it wasn't as if he came off, of course, as somebody seemingly outwardly crazy, but she said she noticed that he had a really weird food fetish. And she said it went beyond being vegan. He required his aunt and uncle to buy brand new pots and pans for him to eat out of because he refused to eat from anything that had meat ever cooked in it. And she said it seemed to be an OCD type of situation. She said otherwise he didn't seem that odd, but I spoke to another aunt by marriage who said that the murder suspect's father, Michael, came from a fairly big family that she said lived very close to the edge. They didn't pay a lot of attention to rules. They were a little bit wild. A couple of the uncles of the murder suspect, she said, served time in jail, but for very minor offenses like gambling or things like that. But I got this sense from both these aunts that the family was pretty odd. And the father's family originally comes from Brooklyn. They later all migrated out to Vegas. And Bryan's father, Michael, is the one that was kind of estranged from the rest of his siblings. And I also heard that he could be kind of difficult with his siblings. And I'm talking now again about the murder suspect's father.
Were they surprised? I mean, these anecdotes are remarkable, but what about their affectation? Were they shocked, dismayed, upset, not surprised? Like, how do they feel about the fact that the person the entire country has been looking for ended up being their family member? Like, how surprised were they about this news that he's the suspect?
Not as surprised as you would think. The one aunt, the one that saw him a few years ago and talked about his food fetish, said she just heard about it. But she was incredibly calm. She is no longer married to the brother, so perhaps the fact that they're not specifically legally in the family anymore gives them some detachment. The other aunt, I'm the one that broke the news to her, and she was completely matter of fact and calm about the whole thing. They didn't want their names used, which is understandable, but no, I mean, I think if it were anyone I'd known, even if it wasn't a relative, I'd be shocked to my core. They did not seem to be that way to me.
Okay, so I'm going to read you this article. There's a couple news sources that did an article on this, but I'm just going to read you the one from Independent. Bryan Kohberger's sister searched his car for evidence before police swooped in. So it's from Dateline, NBC's Dateline. It says Bryan Kohberger's sister feared that her brother was involved in the stabbings of 4 University of Idaho students before police swooped on their parents' home and arrested him for the murder, according to a bombshell report. Sources told NBC that one of the accused killer's older siblings grew increasingly suspicious of her brother and his behavior when the family gathered to spend the holidays together. Her suspicions were so great that at one point, several family members searched Mr. Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra for possible evidence of the crime, they said. In mid-December, Mr. Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at WSU, embarked on a cross-country trip with his father from his student rental home in Pullman, Washington, back to the family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, to spend the holidays together. But during his time at home, his family members noticed that he was behaving somewhat bizarrely. The source said that Mr. Kohberger was constantly wearing latex gloves, including inside their own home. One of his 2 older sisters began to wonder if he could have played a part in the murders, and at one point she raised her concerns with her other family members. She loudly pointed out that at the time of the murders, her brother was living just a few miles from the crime scene and that he drove a white Hyundai Elantra, the make and color of the vehicle at the center of the investigation. Along with his bizarre tendency to wear his latex gloves at all time, she believed that the family should consider that Mr. Kohberger might have killed the 4 victims, the source said. Mr. Kohberger's father allegedly defended his son and insisted he could not have been involved. But the concerns were clearly big enough for several of the family members to reportedly decide to search the 28-year-old's vehicle to look for possible evidence. By that point, police said Mr. Kohberger had already been spotted cleaning his car out with bleach, and so the family members didn't find anything of note, the source said. It is not clear if Mr. Kohberger was aware of his family members' suspicions that he could have been behind the murders, or what prior behavior may have led his own sister to suspect him capable of carrying out such a brutal crime. Soon after, in the early hours of December 30th, law enforcement descended on the family home and arrested him for the murders. At the time of his arrest, the source said Mr. Kohberger was wide awake, standing in the kitchen wearing latex gloves and putting his personal trash in plastic bags to take it out to a neighbor's trash can.
I'm sure there's statistics out there of, many people pass by a murderer, many people know a murderer. Well, I don't. It's very concerning, and it's very eerie and creepy as well.
It's crazy because literally days after these murders happened, he brought it up when I saw him in the hallway.
It's almost too good to be true, unless this guy was miraculously set up, which is like a 1 in a billion chance. No one cares enough about Bryan Kohberger to set him up.
Down a winding tree-lined road on the outskirts of the valley is DeSales University, a private Catholic school with less than 5,000 total students.
It's a small school. It's not like it's a Penn State or a Pitt or a Temple. It's a very small school in a cornfield. So if you go there, you know most of the people within your study and pretty much everyone that goes to the school, and he was not known. At that time, I would have never said, oh yeah, that guy would do something like this. He may have been a little odd or a little off, but other than that, you'd never expect someone to be allegedly part of a quadruple homicide, ever.
Ferraro, who graduated from DeSales with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, is a self-proclaimed true crime junkie.
I was following it day one because who hears about 4 college students that are unfortunately murdered, and how do you not want to keep up with that? So I got on TikTok, YouTube, Google, and I vigorously kept up with this case. And that's why it's shocking to me, because this guy was such a normal dude, average Joe type person. You would never, you don't know what's under people's skin. God forbid if he didn't do it, great. But all the signs point to that he did. He was new, and I said, hey buddy, do you want to be my lab partner? And that's pretty much what was left, so I took him. And it ended up working out very well.
As a commuter student, Kohberger came and went from campus during his undergraduate psychology studies. Ferraro says he kept to himself and didn't show any outward signs of something more menacing.
It's not always the creepy guy with glasses and oily hair and creeping around the corner. It's sometimes just that average Joe that on the inside you have no idea what he looks like, but on the outside he may just seem like a normal person, much like Bryan Kohberger did. I really don't think that there's too many outward telltale signs of someone committing a crime. I feel like it's all mostly internal, which goes back to the blank slate theory and basically how you're raised, what you're exposed to as a child, what your genetics are. That would be predisposition. So like some things you're predisposed to do in life, that's just unfortunate. Your genetics dictate you will be one way. However, the blank slate theory says that dependent on your situation and who you grew up with, what kind of friends you have, how many friends you have, do you have a lover, all these things in combination kind of make you who you are. So it's a combination of both, in my opinion. I'm not a professional. You gotta ask Catherine Ramsey.
As a graduate student at DeSales, Kohberger majored in criminal justice. That means both he and Ferraro studied under legendary forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland. We reached out to Ramsland for this story and were told via email, quote, I'm making no statements about Bryan Kohberger and will not be interviewed for any stories that feature him. But months before Kohberger's arrest, Ramsland appeared on Law&Crime Network's podcast, Cocktails and Cocktails.
Have I come face to face with psychopaths? Absolutely. The coldness, the lack of remorse, definitely. So some people call that evil, but we are finding that it might very well be a brain disorder.
In the interview given just 7 months before the University of Idaho murders, Ramsland explained the workings of a psychopath's mind.
The brains of what we call primary psychopaths, who seem to be born with this brain disconnect, are definitely different. And it allows them to be better predators if that's what they choose to be. Not all psychopaths are criminals, not all psychopaths are murderers, but if they choose that, it allows them to be very effective at it because they really don't have any remorse over what they're doing, and they really can be very calculated. They tend to be very reward driven.
But according to forensic psychologist Dr. John Delatorre, we can't yet label Kohberger as a psychopath or even a serial killer.
Even if he was a serial, even if he does have that, what actually happened was that he was a mass killer, right? That because there was 3+, sometimes it's 4+, depending on what law enforcement agency that you ask. Whoever did this should actually be considered a mass killer. But that doesn't take away from the possibility that they are also a serial killer.
We can't even confirm Ferraro's blank slate theory.
The science have suggested that when we were born, we actually do have coding, right? We do have ways in which we are going to be perceiving the world around us. Now, of course, external influences change who we are and how we're going to respond to those things. But we're not necessarily a blank slate.
But according to Ramsland, a motive may be hard to pin down.
So they have a variety of motives, but their personalities tend to have that rigidity and that inability to go with life's hard knocks and to believe that they're entitled to more and that they need to punish people for them not getting what they think they deserve.
Ferraro has his own theory about a motive.
I don't see this as this grandiose thing where he was trying to get away with it. I think he had this compulsion, this need, this necessity to do it, and he's probably always wanted to do it and finally said, F it, I'm gonna do it.
At least part of Ferraro's theory seems to be accurate. Kohberger had no run-ins with the law while in the Lehigh Valley.
We had no indication he was here at all. We had no indication he had any interaction with law enforcement at all.
After news broke of his arrest, Northampton County District Attorney Terry Houck says his team reviewed area cold cases for a possible link to Kohberger.
When you have somebody that might have serial attached to their name, you just want to make a check to see if there's any connection since he had contact with the county, and there was none here in Northampton County.
Similar investigations were also conducted in neighboring Lehigh County. We reached out to District Attorney Jim Martin, who declined an interview. But while sitting down with Houck, we learned news of Kohberger's arrest came as a shock for the community.
Obviously, it's the reaction that everybody has. It's less, it's like a close to home to him, because then you're watching and people are posting Facebook pictures of him on campus, on some campus close by or something like that.
One such campus is Northampton Community College, where Kohberger made the Dean's List and later received an Associate of Arts and Psychology degree in 2018, before his time at DeSales. Kohberger himself commuted about 50 miles from Albrightsville to the college's Bethlehem campus while studying for his degree. Law&Crime Network reached out to NCC for this story to learn more about Kohberger's time at the school. The senior director of marketing and communications replied in part, quote, "This isn't something we'd like to pursue at the moment, and we'll be in touch should anything change." According to multiple reports, Kohberger frequented the brewery Seven Sirens while he attended college in the area. According to the interviews, Kohberger made multiple women uncomfortable, so much so that a record of his interactions was kept, noting that he made staff concerned about his strange behavior. We reached out to the Seven Sirens owner multiple times and never received a response. But Delatorre says labeling Kohberger as a killer because of these alleged interactions may be a rush to judgment.
They may be engaging in that fundamental attribution error where they're linking all of these things to describe who he is as a person, forgetting that there are many different external influences, that it's certainly possible that all of this stuff, that he was being reactionary. And I think that that's also part of, if he did do this, that reactionary aspect is kind of maybe what compelled him to engage in this particular act.
But could Kohberger's connection to criminal justice have played a role in the murders?
The course that I took that stands out is psychological sleuthing, where you basically enter the mind of a killer. She would give you sheets, and basically the sheets would denote and detail a crime. However, you wouldn't know who did what per se or where this was, but you'd have to, it was a group thing, so you'd get partnered up or in groups, and you would go through these activities and basically come up with a theory or a thesis and then challenge it to Dr. Ramsey.
DeSales boasts a robust criminal justice program, promoting hands-on training and courses taught by renowned professors.
They have an entire house, they call it the crime scene house, that is used for simulations for crime scene investigation or collecting evidence or crime scene photography or responding to other emergencies.
But according to court documents, Kohberger's criminal justice studies were important enough for detectives to investigate, recovering a criminal psychology book and DeSales University documents from his parents' home when a search warrant was executed.
The Master of Arts in Criminal Justice is awarded to Carlina Kemery. Jenna Cook. Bryan Kohberger.
We reached out to Kohberger's entire criminal justice graduating class for this story, but his classmates either didn't reply or denied our request for an interview. One classmate told us via text that DeSales University, quote, sent a general communication that suggested everything go through the university, as to be respectful of the ongoing situation. The Associate Vice President of Marketing and Communications told us via phone the school did not discourage students to speak with the media, but that she was available to assist in media requests on a case-by-case basis. The school's statement via email recapped Kohberger's majors, the years he completed each program, and confirmed he was always a commuter student.
DeSales is just such a close-knit and heartfelt community. Like I said, everybody knows each other, and the fact that really no one knows about this guy, he went in and out.
It's a common theme in Kohberger's past, leaving behind little clues about his isolated personality. Multiple people who knew Kohberger tell us he was strange but hardly memorable.